Greetings, everyone, and welcome. October the 20th, 2025. As you can tell by the thumbnail and the title of this video, I'm talking about Budapest, and it is a slap in the face to Ukraine. Over the last couple of hours, these thoughts began coming in my head, and I determined to share this with you and with the world. So if you are pro-Ukraine or you are anti-Ukraine, I'm going to ask you over the next 5 or 6 minutes to please listen to this, because what the world is experiencing right now, nobody is talking about. We are seriously looking at the possibility of another summit in Budapest between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump to discuss Ukraine. And this carries an irony that is so deep that it actually feels cruel, because it was actually in Budapest back in 1994 that Ukraine was promised safety, sovereignty, and peace in writing, that promised that the world would protect Ukraine. And many people talk about the Budapest Memorandum, but they know nothing about it. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine suddenly found themselves holding the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. Nearly 1,900 strategic nuclear warheads, 176 intercontinental ballistic missiles, and a stockpile of weapons that rivaled the United States and Russia. Washington, London, and Moscow were desperate to keep those weapons under control, so they came up with this deal. And on December the 5th, 1994, we are approaching, over 30 years. It'll be 31 years coming up here in another couple of months. Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum on security assurances alongside the United States, Bill Clinton, the United Kingdom, John Major, and the Russian Federation, Boris Yeltsin. The terms were simple, at least on paper. Ukraine would agree to give up its nuclear weapons and join the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a non-nuclear state, and in return, those powers would respect Ukraine's independence. Who? The United States, Great Britain, and Russia. They would respect their sovereignty and their existing 1991 borders and refrain from the threat or use force against Ukraine. It sounded like a victory for diplomacy. President Bill Clinton and Prime Minister John Major and Boris Yeltsin hailed it as a new foundation of unity and European security, and Ukraine, being a newly born nation, independent and hopeful, they dismantled their missiles. In fact, I can tell you, I have been on the sites at the locations where these underground missile silos were. They're in many locations around Ukraine. They dismantled those missiles. They returned those warheads to Russia, and they trusted the paper on where there were signatures. But there was a catch, and this is what the world doesn't understand. The Budapest Memorandum was not a treaty. It was not legally binding. It offered assurances, but unfortunately not guarantees. And that is why we keep hearing, rightfully so, President Vladimir Zelensky stating, we need real security guarantees. This is why. There were no enforcement mechanisms from the Budapest Memorandum, no automatic defense clauses. In other words, there was a promise of protection, a guarantee of security, but no security and no protection. For 2 decades, that flaw was theoretical. But then in February of 2014, it became real, because that month, Russian forces, without insignia, without patches, without uniforms, they entered Crimea. And within weeks, they had seized government buildings. They staged a disputed referendum on March 16th and formally annexed the territory of Crimea on March the 18th, 2014. One of the very signatories of the Budapest Memorandum had violated the nation that it signed the guarantee for, Ukraine. The United States and the UK, they condemned the move. They imposed sanctions, but there was no military intervention. Zero. The assurances, they proved to be words and not walls. Then came the Donbass War. Beginning in April of 2014, Russian-backed separatists in Donetsk and Lugansk regions waged an insurgency against Kyiv. They began their roots in the area that we now look at the map all the time in places like Slavyansk. For 8 years, Ukraine fought to hold its territory while the world debated how much support to offer. Thousands died during those 8 years. Millions of Ukrainians were displaced, and the Budapest Memorandum, the credibility of it eroded even further. And in the first couple of years after the full-scale invasion, everybody's screaming, Budapest Memorandum, Budapest Memorandum. Why? On February 24th, 2022, the dam finally broke. Russia launched a full-scale invasion from multiple directions towards Kyiv, towards Kharkiv, through Mariupol, from its own borders and from the borders of Belarus and from occupied and stolen Crimea. The largest war in Europe since 1945 began, and the irony now became unbearable. The country that had once possessed enough nuclear weapons to deter any invasion now faced destruction from the very power that had promised to protect it, Russia. Ukraine's president and foreign minister repeatedly invoked the Budapest Memorandum in those early days, calling it a symbol of broken trust. Western nations cited it as well. Many European nations cited it as well as a reason to support Ukraine. But again, there was no direct military guarantee that may have made the promise real. By the time the memorandum turned 30 years old on December the 5th, 2024, its name had become synonymous with failure. A diplomatic triumph turned cautionary tale. And now, in 2025, in Budapest, the same city where Ukraine's security was supposedly secured, the idea of a Putin and Trump meeting to talk peace feels nothing but staged theatrics and propaganda. The setting would be perfect for irony. Two men, one of whom broke the promise and the other skeptical of honoring it, discussing the fate of the nation that relies on it. Budapest was meant to be the birthplace of post-Cold War security. Instead, today, Budapest stands as a monument to what happens when words replace will, when a nation trades its defense for diplomacy and the world does not keep its word. Ukraine kept its promise. The world did not. And that is a slap in the face and the cruel irony of Budapest. Now, what will you see over the coming weeks? And this is October the 20th, 2025. You will see an absolute onslaught of Russian propaganda blanketing and blitzkrieging the entire world, trying to set the stage to disrupt anything possible that could bring about a peaceful conclusion and any positive result for Ukraine. They will blitz it, they will assault it so that everything fails so that Putin can continue to wage his evil war. How do I know that's true? Because they've already began. 2 Americans sitting in Moscow, and I know, guys, Russia today, nothing but propaganda. I know it. I know that Scott Ritter is a joke. I know that Rick Sanchez is a traitor, now moved to Moscow to spew and spout Russian propaganda. But this is how it will happen. Just a few minutes ago, listen to Scott Ritter and Sanchez in Moscow.
The other problem the president has is he's advised by people who know nothing about Russia.
Right.
Because this is as simple as it gets. Right now, I think at the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post have a headline that says that the deal that was cut between President Trump and President Putin was Donbass will be returned to the Russians and the line of contact will be frozen and that's it. Mm-hmm. And I'm someone who says, you know, as an American, the Constitution is everything. That's what defines the constitutional republic. Without the Constitution, we don't have a United States of America.
Right.
And so I ask the American people, you guys understand that that's true, that's real. The Constitution is all important. then why can't you respect the Russian Constitution?
Listen.
Why do you insult the Russian Constitution, insult the Russian people, insult the Russian nation by implying that they're willing to give up their territory? Because Kherson in totality, Zaporizhia in totality, Donetsk and Lugansk in totality are Mother Russia constitutionally. President Putin, with all due respect, has no authority to give away Russia to anybody. The Constitution prohibits, so he can't negotiate the surrender of Kherson, the surrender of Zaporizhia. And he will never negotiate that. He said so straight up. And one thing you have to learn about the Russian president is when he says something, he means it.
Well, there you have it. This is just the beginning of what you're going to see, but that will be the narrative. It's ours, it's ours, it's ours. Over the previous 8 or 9 minutes of this video, if you've made it to this far, you are as angry as I am, but I'm sharing with you how this narrative will unfold. You guys haven't seen anything yet. This is just the tip of the iceberg because Russia is demented and they absolutely will go with the argument that it is their territory. And now, 30 years later, the world is whispering about another Budapest moment. But tell me, how do you hold a peace summit in the same city where peace was betrayed? The Budapest Memorandum was supposed to make Ukraine safe. Instead, it became a lesson carved in blood. Never trade your defense for someone else's promise. Because when the paper burns, only power survives. Russia will go 100% on the global offensive now, and propaganda will be their primary weapon. So what do you think? Drop your thoughts below, because history might just be repeating itself again another time in Budapest. This is where we're at. No mention of Ukraine. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this message. Be blessed.